Hello, Lola. It is such a pleasure to have you on Cosmic Heartist. I have been admiring your art, as I shared with you before we started recording, for an entire year. I feel like it's been more, and every time I see your art pop up on my feed, I get inspired to create art myself. I think
Aw, thank
the colors and the textures and the feelings and the emotions behind your art, I feel they carry such gravity. So I really wanted to have you on to talk about how you got into it and what makes you excited about it. But before anything, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, what you
you.
enjoy doing, what you love, and yeah, anything you'd like to share.
Thank you. Thank you, Karina. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to get into my art and into everything that I do like to do with a lot of heart into it. So I'm excited to be on this podcast. I'm really grateful and honored that you thought of me and that you reached out after having liked my art and being drawn to the color. Color is actually my favorite part about art, like putting down color on paper. I feel like that's where the true happy spot is. That's the most intimate part of my paintings. Also, when I spend time alone with them, creating the colors, I think that that's the funnest part as well. So I'm happy that you connect to that part since it's one of my favorite parts. Something that maybe I would like to share is I love to cook. I cook vegan food and I've been cooking vegan food since about 2018. And I love to cook prior to being vegan. I would cook all the time, but being vegan really allowed me to just really play a little bit more. I think that because the ingredients were more veggie based, they were a little bit more accessible than trying to like buy a fancy piece of steak for a fancy dinner. It was like, okay, I don't have to spend that much money. I'm just buying a fancy bean. So I got to play a little bit more with that. And yeah, I would say that those are my two favorite things to do besides going on long walks and spending time in water.
Mm. And where do you cook for anyone that's listening? And if they want to try your cooking, where can they try?
Yeah. So I cook for a business called Alma y Sazon that I own with my sister and my husband. We are based in the San Francisco Bay Area and we cook out of La Cocina, which is a nonprofit that helps immigrant women formalize their food businesses. I also work a lot with the immigrant women there, just getting tips and advice from them as chefs or like going on little stages with them, following them around while they do a pop up to see what it means to really grow in the food industry. And so it's a really good connection to have here in the Bay. Especially because I'm the first in my family to really go the business owner route. So it's important that I have older people that are similar to me and similar to my story that have something similar going on and can actually give me some tips because a lot of the times I feel like I should have it all together and then I go into the kitchen and the chefs remind me like, no, it's okay, like you don't have to have it all figured out just yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but we do little pop-ups all through the Bay Area. We announce them on Instagram. That's kind of like the best way to find us now. We'll hopefully have a kitchen in the future.
That's amazing, and there's so much there, and I think it's so nice to be able to have women around you that have kind of been through maybe not the exact same thing that you're going through, but something similar to guide you and to open this space for you and to just allow you to remember that you're okay. I think
Yeah.
so many times we look down on what we're doing and be like, oh my God, we don't have it all together now, what? And so to go into a space and have them be like, hey, you're doing completely fine. We don't have it figured out either. That's
Yeah.
so precious.
It makes you feel less alone. Like it makes you feel like, oh, okay, okay, my community's got me and maybe I'm stressed out today, but they can help like alleviate some of it off of my shoulders by letting me know like, oh, I've been through this or this happened to me before and this is what I did. It definitely helps to just be able to bounce back ideas in the small business community, especially post pandemic where everybody I feel is a little bit more open to really like talking about the nitty gritty because we all went through something crazy together. So we just are a little bit more open and sharing what our business might be going through. So it's been definitely a really good connection. And we're actually working with a couple of other businesses and doing a farm to table meal. So we planted some seeds and now we're watching our crops grow and we're going to be cooking with them come harvest time. So that's going to be really fun too.
That's so cool. So I lived at the Bay Area in 2015, and I really wish I lived there now instead because your food
Where
sounds
did you live?
amazing. I
Where did
lived
you
in
live?
Treasure Island.
Oh my gosh.
Very random. I lived in Treasure Island and I lived in the Mission for a month, but yeah, I wish it was now instead because I see you creating like your art events, your workshops and
Yeah,
stuff, and I wish there were more of that back in the day. And now as I'm thinking about it, or like right before this podcast, actually, you were saying how after the pandemic, we're talking about the nitty gritty more. And I'm noticing also that after the pandemic, like that's when all these workshops have started coming up, like way more than
yeah,
ever, because everybody got the time to
good.
sit with ourselves and be like, hey, this is what I'm good at. This is how I can share it with the world.
Yeah,
And a lot of times I feel like I'm like, oh man, the pandemic happened so that we could realize that we're not supposed to, take advantage of Mother Earth in this way. And maybe we should still have that kind of pandemic ish vibe to allow time to nature, like maybe a
yeah,
month in a year that we all don't travel. I don't know, something crazy
yeah,
like that. But at the
yeah,
same time, post pandemic, we're also coming out of our shells more. And I think that's something that's not spoken about enough either.
yeah. I think so too. I think it forced a lot of people to come out of their shells. I know that, well, first off, I was gonna say I do the Treasure Fest at Treasure Island. So I live paint
Mm.
at that event
Ooh,
every month. So yeah, that's right where you used to live. So I'm
yeah,
there
that's
like
so
at the end of
cool.
every month for both of the days. I do a live piece while I'm there. So I'll start it on Saturday and I'll do like a landscape, and then on Sunday I'll add some surreal aspects to it just for fun. I call it just for fun because I feel like there's a lot of mistakes in the paintings, but I'm like, these are just for fun paintings.
That's
Um,
amazing. Is it based on the Treasure Island view?
No, the first one kind of was. So for the first one that I did, I got a really big panel and there was a lot of like clouds, the ones that are really fluffy at the bottom and then at top, which are the ones that I paint all of the time around. So I did take from them and kind of paint from that. But from then on, it's kind of just been like a little fun, just whatever comes to mind. But I have been incorporating a little bit of the Bay into it, like Bay Area art, since it's recognizable. People will be like, "Oh, I know this," or "Oh, I like this." But yeah, so definitely that's also something that brings in community and like lets us be outside sharing what we like to do.
Yeah.
But the workshops definitely are a fun way to get a good amount of people out and a good amount of people like creating with you. That's really fun too. And it's been such a blessing to host them because I remember being really young and telling my mom one day, like, I want to be a teacher. I'm going to bring all the kids home from school after school and I'm going to teach them how to draw, and she didn't let me. But but yeah, but now it's cool because now it happens and now I do get to teach people and I do get to share my art with them and share my progress with them, and yeah, slow down with a couple of people at a week's time. Yeah.
Hmm. That sounds very much like inner child healing, and that's so perfect
Mhm.
for like to bring up during Leo season that like we have these dreams. Just recently too, I was thinking about how I really liked to teach when I was younger too, and I didn't put two and two together because now I love teaching about astrology. And back then I would teach like whoever I could find to teach about like one
Yeah.
plus one, like random addition. I hate math. I don't know why I was teaching math, but it's always like those little hints that come up when we're kids that now we're like, oh my gosh. Okay, so I want to ask you about two things before we dive deeper. The first thing I wrote down is color, because I love how you said that you work a lot on your color. And as I was just sitting and feeling into having this conversation with you, I was thinking about how all paint like comes the same, right? It either comes in a palette or it comes like this, and that's about it. And people like go in, get this, and like add different colors together and create something like what's behind
Yeah.
you. And when we think about that, that's nuts, because this is the medium, like something so tiny. And
Yeah.
then, but like putting your time, putting your devotion, putting your own inspiration, and just pointing out that it's not easy to mix colors.
Yeah. It's not it's not easy. I think you get better with time. I feel like now I'm pretty confident in saying like, okay, I'll grab a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and like mix it all together. And then I'll say, wow, okay, I actually did it. And it's easier in my head when I have to do it in class or when I have to help someone get to the right color. I struggle a little bit more in thinking as fast as I'm saying it and for someone else without knowing what already happened to the color like before I arrived. It's just not quite right
Yeah.
when I like get there, but that makes it a little bit harder and I have to think a lot more about color, but for the most part, with acrylic paint, you always want to mix a little bit of different colors into it and not paint directly from the tube. That allows you to have a little bit more leeway and a little bit more control in how dark or how light your color is. So I'm always mixing something in there and seeing how it affects it. I always say start really small, but once you get it a little bit more, you're able to just do it in your head and then you mix it and you're like, wow, I actually created that color, which is crazy. When I was first painting, I would go on TikTok live and people would help me. I would say, oh, I feel like this color's a little bit off. And people in the comments would be saying, add blue, add this. And I would add it and I would say, thank you, that helped. That really helped.
That's
So it
amazing.
takes practice. Yeah.
Yeah, and it becomes a collaborative effort as well. And it's so
Mhm.
interesting that you say that when you're helping other people through it, it's challenging you, right? It's making you use your brain. But the coolest part is it's something that you already know, because it's something that you taught
Yeah.
yourself. But it's just asking you to use your brain a little bit harder. And I guess when you're doing that with other people, then naturally you also start doing that when you're creating your own paintings. You're like, okay, how can I
Yeah.
challenge myself just a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah, I always say that painting teaches me something each and every single time that I sit down to do it, whether it be through color or even through the paintbrushes. A lot of the time I'm like, oh, like I didn't know that if you flipped your paintbrush this way, you could get this effect. So it's definitely always teaching me something new.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. Okay, so I want to ask you about something before I really want to get into your painting story. But what I want to ask you about is business. So,
Okay.
in the beginning, you said that you're the first generation in your family that has gone the business route, right?
Yeah.
Here, there, rather. And what I find interesting is something like art, right? We can turn it into a business, but
Yeah.
in back in the day mentality, it wasn't a business,
Was it? Yeah.
right? and
Yeah.
and so it's so fascinating that you like claimed it so like in such a big way, which is so beautiful, that you're like, I'm the first generation business owner. But also, how did you get that switch to flip in your brain to be like, hey, I can create this as a full-blown business?
Yeah, well, I think that seeing other women do it was the biggest inspiration. When I first started doing art or sharing art, not before I started sharing art, there was a lot of accounts that I followed, a lot of women in New York, that were creating like a little bit of an art circle. And then started finding people here in the Bay, in California, kind of everywhere. And I just started following them and seeing their little posts, and I wasn't posting just yet. And I just had the idea that I wanted to get good, and would spend a lot of time drawing and investing my time into just figuring out what it was that I liked. And I would see people successfully like creating these little art businesses with their where they were selling their prints or stickers, and I thought, okay, like that seems kind of fun. I could kind of do that. And it wasn't until someone at my job asked me if they could buy one of my prints when I was doodling one day. And I was like, You want a print of this?" I was so shocked. And they said, "Yeah, just let me know how much it will be." And I actually worked close enough to a printing store that I just walked to the shop, had the print printed, and I came back and I was like, $20. And he was like, "Okay." And he gave me $20. And I was like, oh my gosh, like $20 is a lot of money for my drawing, my doodle that I just did. And that was the first time that I had ever sold a print. And I would just kind of watch what other women who were doing similar stuff to me were doing. So they were doing like pop-up shops and little community art events, and I would just kind of try to follow along what they were doing until it became really natural for me to also do those things. And then I could start dreaming bigger by thinking, okay, I'm gonna have my own art show. And so it just made that switch. I think that what made me push it more forward as business is that it did happen during the pandemic. So as slow of a start as I would have loved to have, where I'm just rolling out art little by little while I was still working, I had lost my job and had put like an SOS online just saying like, please buy my paintings, please like buy my art in any way that you can. Like, this is how I have to make money for the time being now. So that also being something that made my mentality switch and say, okay, this is not just my art, but also a way of income for me, a way of making money and of getting my name more out there through social media too.
I think it's so powerful to look at or to have an example, right, of what other women are doing and then be like, hey, I can try this too. And
Yeah.
it's so cool when it's women doing it because then we're like, okay, like they're doing it. I'm a woman. I can do it. And
Yeah.
I feel like when women do things versus when men do things, there are so many different there are like so many more different options just because we
Yeah.
are way more creative, right? In the ways that our brains blossom. And then we see, okay,
Yeah.
she's doing that. That's not something that I want to do, but maybe I can get inspiration from what she's doing to
Mhm.
do like something similar. So thank you for sharing that story. And also, I think it's fascinating how usually what happens is we're just pushed out of our comfort zone. And that's kind of how
Yeah.
we start. Like it was like you were doodling and he was like, hey, I would buy that. And you were like, okay, I'll try it
Yeah.
out. Versus like, should I do it? Should I not? I don't know. Will anyone get it? Um,
Yeah.
there's just so much more power in like being like, okay, I'm just gonna do it. Also, like being at the spot where you have to, you don't really have a
Yeah.
choice. You just gotta do it.
There was a lot of support, I think, from people around me, but also it just felt like from universe itself when I decided to do art full time. One of the first like jobs that I got during the pandemic was I did a little book for a family in Egypt, and they found me through Reddit. And I don't know how they found me because I've never used Reddit before. And they messaged me and asked me if I could do some illustrations for them because they were putting together a little book. And I did maybe 10 or 12 illustrations. I worked alongside the family maybe for a whole year on a couple of different projects. And it just felt like everything would align when it needed to because I was getting this help from across the world in a really crazy time, and I was still employed, but I was just drawing. I was just kind of like, okay, I do this doodle, I send it to them, they're gonna give me $100. And it was just drawing nonstop, but it did feel like because it was from halfway across the world, it felt like such a big support in just Mother Earth itself and just saying, like, yes, go forward with this. Like you're gonna be okay.
And the fact that they found you on Reddit and you've never been on
Yeah.
Reddit.
Now
Like that's
when I have
magic.
questions, when I have random questions, I'll like type it out and then I'm like, ready.
Which is what we know Reddit is for, right? But how
Yeah.
cool that they found you on Reddit and got to like
Yeah.
commission you from across the world through Reddit. That's
Yeah.
magic. Times like these are when we're like, okay, the internet is actually pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's actually helping.
Yeah. Okay, it's time for your art story. I'm so excited to hear about it. Tell me how you started creating art, when, how did that blossom? How did your art style change? Anything
Yeah.
you want to share?
Okay. I always loved creating. I art class was my favorite class growing up, and I would do these summer camps where the art activity was my favorite time of the day. I would just look forward to that part of the day. And always loved during like back to school time buying like the crayons that had the most amount of crayons. Like I needed the most possible, and I couldn't explain it when I was younger, but I just was like, I need this once, mom. A lot of the
It's
times
that
they,
Taurus rising.
yeah, I needed all of the choices, and I just like loved having them, and I loved creating. And when I did it like all through middle school, all of the 3 years, primarily focused in art. And it's something that I wanted to do in high school as well. But when I started high school and I was in my first art class, there was like two things that kind of pulled me back from doing it. One was that the art class seemed like there were the most popular kids were in this class, and I didn't know any of them. And so it seemed like a very energetic class, but it's because it was one of the electives. It's where like everybody gets together to be in a class at the same time. And I just didn't know a lot of people. So in the art class, it wasn't the most comfortable environment, even though I have loved to create my whole life. And when I was also thinking about which elective I would take, my counselor suggested taking another language to help my college resume. And so I think that it was a combination of not being so comfortable in my environment and also an adult telling me like, "Oh, this will look good on your college resume," that I decided to go with French instead of art. It was my choice. I knew it was my choice at the time, but I definitely reflecting back, I can feel me in ninth grade just being like, I'm not comfortable in this class because of all of these people who make me a little like self-conscious. And so I took a step back from being in art and focused more on being in French class, which I don't know French, so that didn't necessarily go the best way for me. Instead, I found out that I didn't like having a seventh period and then tried to get away without having like the last period every single year after that. But basically, in senior year, I decided to go back into art class and I decided to go into ceramics. And during that time, I was also taking a class called Spanish Art and Literature. And so in the ceramics class, I was having a lot of fun. I was building a lot of stuff, and the teacher really like she grew to like me and told me, I don't really like seniors in my art class, but we're gonna make an exception for you. But seniors just never come to art class, so it's like I don't like them in here. But she was so sweet, and at the end of senior year, she actually wrote me a little letter to like keep doing what I was doing and to just like not doubt it too much and just continue. And it was really cute because I was like, oh, nobody else wrote me a letter except for my art teacher. And in my Spanish art and literature class, we were learning a lot about Goya and Salvador Dali and just a lot of Spanish artists. We would just review art and watch movies all the time. It's basically what this class was. And we got split up into these groups, and every group was supposed to create one piece of a painting. We were going to create a full big canvas, and there was going to be four corners, all created in different art styles. And at the time, I wanted impressionism, which is similar to what Van Gogh does, where it's just a bunch of little lines to create your brushstrokes. Because I thought, wouldn't that be just the easiest one? Like, you get it, you're done. And I ended up getting surrealism. And I remember thinking, this is gonna be really hard because what am I supposed to do? Like, just put flamingos like in places, or what do I do? And I remember having to really think and push myself in how to think outside the box in a way that it still kind of made sense with what we were painting. And yeah, so I added some cool parts to this painting. We were in a group, so it was a group effort. But one of my favorite parts that I did add to it was this graffiti portion. Like, we painted the Alhambra from Spain, which is a building. It's a white building in Spain. And I had written like La Alhambra in like a graffiti style on the corner in the surrealist part. And I had been so proud of how it looked, but what made me even more proud is hearing one of the AP art students being like, "Oh, I like this part in this corner." And so getting that affirmation from someone who I knew was a good artist was like, that was me, that was me. And so it made me really excited to be sharing my art and be just be doing it. Um it was in senior year where after AP exams, the seniors take time to paint like ceiling tiles, and we can leave them up in the school. And so during that time, I think I helped paint like five or six of them, and I was just having a really fun time painting them. But didn't necessarily decide painting was for me just then, but I was just having a lot of fun. And fast forward to when I moved to the Bay Area for school, I went to Mills College, and that was in around 2015. And when I came to Mills, I had a friend who recognized all of the graffiti artists like everywhere. She would just see a tag and she would be like, "Oh, that's so and so." And their tags are all over the world. And this is so and so. And she would just recognize every single tag we would see, which helped me learn about all of the street art that we were seeing. And so learning about the street art and seeing the colors and being in Oakland where there's just so much street art and so much talent from the community was so inspiring. Immediately, I knew that I wanted to do something with art. It was like a switch came back on where I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to get good at this. Like, this is something that I wanted to get good at, even though I took like a long break. And from there, I bought a little black book and started drawing and doodling and using it kind of as a doodle journal where I would doodle my day, or if I anything funny, anything that I could think of, I would just put on there. I did a lot of lettering in that time too. I wanted to practice spray painting, but I never wanted to illegally tag. I wanted to like learn how to do it and makes like a really cool graffiti piece and then just like bring it home. I never wanted to actually like go out in the train tracks and try to do any of that. um but I did want to learn, and the community of artists that we were around, a lot of people had little black books and they would get shared and people would flip through your little books, and people started doodling on mine in like empty free pages. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but then someone was like, "Oh, that's like a I liked what you got going on here. I wanted to add like my own little page." And that made me feel good because at the time, I didn't think that I had anything going on. I was just putting out whatever was coming to my mind every single day. But I had made a decision that I was going to get good. So I was investing more and more and more time into drawing and doodling. And I would go to restaurants and sit and doodle. And every now and then I would go buy myself a new art supply to test out and see how I liked it and
Was
just
that in
practice.
college or post-college?
So I didn't graduate college. I only did 1 year of college, and then after I didn't go back, I was working at a restaurant, and that's when I was kind of lost a
That
little
was
bit.
playtime.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, what can I do to like what do I want to do? And that's when I was like, okay, I've always wanted to do art, so I should just like get good at this because it's what I want to do. And before going into work, I would go into a coffee shop and like draw for like 30 minutes to an hour. And it was a commitment that I had made to myself. Like every time before work, I'm going to draw for 30 minutes to an hour. And when I switched jobs, I kept the same commitment. Like, oh, during my lunch break, I always draw. Like, I have to draw. I'm trying to get better. And it was through these jobs that I sold my first print because someone was like, I see you're always drawing. Like, I see you're always doodling. Like, what do you got in there? And through these jobs, too, is how I was pushed to start an Instagram account. Someone said like you should post this, like this is actually good. Like I would see this on Instagram, and so it was the same people around me that just kept kind of like giving me ideas, and the reassurance was good for me. I kind of needed people to say like, oh, this is good, because I feel like as someone who can be a perfectionist and is a little hard on themselves to just want to go ahead and do it was always like, oh, I want to be a little better before I start sharing it everywhere. But that's kind of how we got me started when I once I was out of college and kind of figuring out what my art was. I think when I started sharing my art online, it was around the time that some immigrant children were missing from the centers, from the detention centers. And I think that they had done a miscalculation where they had misplaced around 1,400 kids. They just didn't have a record of where they went after they freed them from the immigrant detention centers. And my first art piece that I posted was to bring awareness to the fact that all of these children were missing, because it just felt like a really I didn't know what else to do. And art was the way that I was communicating then. And so that was the first thing that made me be like, okay, no, I'm posting art. Like this has to happen. And in the beginning, when I started posting, a lot of stuff like that was going on in the immigrant community. I think that a 21-year-old woman had been shot at the border, and the news kept saying she was 15, or the news kept saying she was 21 when she was actually 15. And so I was making art for that as well. And then I started kind of, this was still just pencil art and marker art. I wasn't sharing any paintings yet because I wasn't really painting yet. I was just sharing art that I was making. And I think it was in 2018 is when I first bought my first set of acrylic paints. And I had bought like my tube of like 30 acrylic paints, and I was really excited. And I came home and I opened everything in the dining room table. And I thought it was gonna be like one night, but it just kept rolling over. And it was maybe a whole week and a half, and I had just taken over the dining room table, and I had roommates at the time. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. And I was just painting everywhere, and I painted my first painting, and that's when I realized that painting was something that continued to invite me to come back and spend time. Whereas every drawing that I had that I would do before, I would do the drawing, and then next day it was like new drawing, blank page. And when it came to painting, it was like I kept being invited or called back to the painting wherever I was to just continue adding to it. And I think that's when I knew, like, oh, this medium chose me. Like, this is how I'm going to be communicating, because it keeps calling me back. It just wants me to keep spending time with it. And then from that moment on, I at least have one painting that I'm working on.
That's such a beautiful story, and I love the way you said it invited and called you back in, and that it shows you. And I've never heard it put like that. And it's so interesting to think about that. Like, what are the things that choose us? And maybe that's what we need to do more of, right? Instead of pushing and forcing and being like, I'm supposed to be good at this, so I should do this. What if instead we're just like blossoming out and being like, what wants me? And if
Yeah.
that wants me, I'll go into it a little bit more. And I totally see that with drawing and painting being more inviting. But so your whole journey started with drawing,
With drawing. Hmm.
and
Yeah.
painting only started in the last like 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that black book thing that you were talking about is so cool. I've never heard about that. That artists come
Yeah.
together and do black books and fill up each other's pages.
It's so cute. It was so cute when like people would be over at our spot, because I used to live with a lot of the girls that I went to college with. And so I was asleep one day and I woke up and I was like, oh my God, people drew on my book. And someone was like, oh, that's so cool. That means they liked what was in it. And I was like, that that makes me so happy.
That is so cute. I love that so much. And okay, so before you went to the Bay Area, where were you?
So my family lives in Idaho, and my mom moved us out to Idaho when I was 8 years old, and I graduated from high school in 2014. For about 2 months, I lived outside of Portland in a place called Forest Grove. And then I realized that wasn't for me. And I went back home and talked to my college counselor for like the rest of the year, worked and got enough money and a scholarship to basically come out to the Bay.
Amazing. Okay,
Yeah.
and that's how you ended up at the Bay. And I think the Bay is such a beautiful place to be for art. Like you were sharing, like all the murals. Oh my God, I would
Um,
lose my mind over all the murals
yeah.
around the mission, especially. Like
The
after
ones
we
in-
stop recording, I'm gonna show you one mural that specifically stood out to me, and you probably know it, but just man, like it's a whole different world out there. And being here in the Philippines, like that's one of the things that I miss the most about the Bay Area. It's that like it's such a conducive environment for art, and almost everywhere you look someone's creating something, and
yeah.
everything is considered art. It's not just like, hey, you're drawing, that's art, or you're painting, that's art. It's like food is art. I mean, journaling is art. Sharing your voices, everything is art.
Yeah, yeah. When I first got to the Bay, I knew that Diego and Frida had lived here in the past. And so one of the first things that I wanted to do is I wanted to see one of it didn't matter whose, one of Diego or Frida's paintings in real life. And that was one of like, I just got here, this is what needs to happen. I need to see one of these paintings. And luckily you then did have access to some of their paintings for free. We went to the San Francisco Institute of Art, where they have a Diego Rivera fresco that you can just walk in and see. And I remember that that was like my biggest mission when I got here, because I always loved art. I always just loved looking at it and knowing that those artists lived in this area. I wanted to see what they created while they were in this area, and I had that interest, even though I wasn't creating as frequently as I am now. I still had all of that interest to see what they did in this area and how they saw this space, and yeah, to see how they communicate through their own paintings.
And seeing that kind of art in real life, I think makes it so much more tangible, so much more attainable, so much more like I can do this too. and
Yeah.
they were there when they did it. And I mean, maybe not everything, but like it just gives you that ability to be like, this can be mine too. And that's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely like gives you a little adrenaline. You're
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
okay, humans are
Uh,
so cool.
exactly. Humans are so cool. And it's so cool when we do choose to express ourselves, because if we choose not to, right? And if we choose to be in like the robotic culture of like, hey, gonna like 9 to 5 and spend all my time on my phone, then we lose this ability to kind of discover what's inside of us, number one, and then share what's inside of us. And so often, like, such cool things are inside of us, but it's little teenhood things, I feel like, that have taken us away from it, like you shared in the ninth grade. And when you felt like you were like, you started closing off in that specific art class, right? Because you weren't
Yeah.
comfortable. And of course, that's not something that just happens to you. That's something that happens to, I feel like, every teenage girl or
Yeah.
preteen girl at some point. We're like, hey, I'm so creative. I love all these things. And then eventually we get judged for it, or we hear people
Yeah.
gossiping about it or whatever. And then we're like, never mind, I don't want to do it ever again.
Yeah.
And then we come back later in our lives and we're like, oh my God, I abandoned myself for that. And then we
Yeah, you
start
think
doing more and more. And it's like, holy
it's
shit. Yeah, exactly.
silly.
Exactly. Because our relationship with ourselves is the most important, right? And I mean, creating art is part of how we honor that relationship, I feel like. Okay, so I have another question for you. And my question is, um, what is your process when you decide that you're gonna create a piece, or when you decide that you're gonna create art? And also, what do you do when you know that you should should make something, but you don't really feel like doing it at all?
Okay. So my process for creating when I have to start a new piece is when it feels the most freeing. I have aphantasia, so it means that I don't see images or full on things in my mind. It's for the most part like pitch black up there. I can imagine and conceptualize thing funnily enough thanks to art, because art has taught me how to remember what things look like and how to like see them in a 2D into 3D in my head. But for a really long time I couldn't see a lot of images in my head. And so when it comes to painting, I see bits and pieces. So sometimes when I sit in front of a blank canvas, I have like a glimpse of a sunset, and then I'm like, okay, I know what the sunset on this canvas looks like. And a lot of the times, I don't get the second part of the painting until I'm done with the first part of the painting. Like once I paint the whole sunset, then I'll start seeing something in front of the sunset or something in the corner, and then I'll say, "Okay, I know what's coming next." And then from then on, like little by little, all of the things kind of start revealing themselves to me until it's done. And then when it's done, it's almost like the painting tells me what its name is. And then I'm like, oh, okay, like now it makes sense. Everything makes sense. Like from the mood of the sunset to everything that I chose, it's now kind of making sense. But for a long process of the creation, I'm just listening to like what color feels right, what I should do next. Like it's very intuitive, and it's a lot of listening. Like I'm listening a lot to my guides who are just letting me know which way to go or what to do. And a lot of it is really emotional too. When it comes to color, I tend to pick color based on emotion, and I also dress kind of like the paintings that I'm creating at the time that I'm creating them. Like if I'm creating a super blue piece, I'll notice that, oh, I've been wearing blue every day this week. Like I just clearly am gravitating towards this color right now. And I noticed that through a lot of my paintings where I'm like, oh, like this is fun. My painting is kind of fun right now. And so it's fun to see how that creation process also then reflects in my everyday life. And then when it comes to creating when I really don't want to, I have this separate journal called like my low commitment paintings. And these are paintings that I go at for just one session only. I don't come back to them. Like, even if I wanted to, the paper that I'm using is too weak to handle two painting sessions. So it's good because it just like one and you're done. That's it. And a lot of the times I do like the art that I create there, and then that like ends up going into a different painting or I end up making it bigger. But for the most part, they're in my low commitment paintings. Sometimes I don't want to create anything and I just grab a tube of paint and just squeeze it a couple times on the paper, take my brush and just smear it around, and I'm like, that's good enough for today. Yeah, so it's like a place to make bad art so that I don't feel so much pressure from the my bigger paintings where I'm having to listen a lot. And sometimes with my bigger paintings, there is places where I get like stumped, where I think like, oh, I feel like something else wants to like show up here, but maybe some fear of mine isn't letting it come through, or I don't want to ruin this painting, so I'm not letting it like fully guide me. But yeah, that's for the most part how I go about both of those things.
That process is so key, I feel like, for artists, allowing the next thing to unfold. Something that I notice is, of course, like writer's block, for example, is something that's so heard of, right? And something that I think of every time I hear about someone going through writer's block is, have you shared your work? Because if you haven't shared your work, nothing new is kind of going to drop in. Which
Mhm.
is what I thought of when you said that you start by painting one aspect of the painting. Like, if you're not fully focused on that one aspect, then naturally nothing else is going to drop in. But then because you're so there, it's like, okay, this is what's next, and this is what's
Yeah.
next. And
Mhm.
there is such grace in that patience and being like, okay, I'm just going to give my all to the sunset. I know this is a big canvas and I know that there is so much more coming, but everything is going to the sunset right now. Like, that's
Yeah.
such a meditative process, I can imagine.
And it really does speak to you. Like the second you're done with the sunset, you'll go to sleep, and then right before you fall asleep, you'll know exactly like what's coming next. You're like, "Oh, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do that." And so then next time when you go in front of your canvas, it's very clear like I had the vision of what's coming next. Like I already in my head I know. And so now it's just about getting yourself to do that second part so that you can keep listening to what's going to keep unfolding.
Exactly. And I also love how you said that you have a separate notebook to make bad art, which is interesting because I feel like no art is ever bad art, right? But then in
Right.
our brains, we kind of need to have that distinction. And it sounds like you're so disciplined, which is so awesome. And I think it's what a lot of um artists or blooming artists need, is that self-discipline to be like, hey, I'm gonna paint. Okay, so what would you say to someone that is discovering now that
Yeah.
they're into art and that they like to create art, and maybe they're feeling a little bit insecure because of how they were graded in art when they were back in school? And what do you have to say about grades when it comes to art? That's kind of our rounding up question.
Okay. When I think about grades, I think about how I got really lucky because my teacher, my art teacher that I had for 3 years in middle school, would actually ask you to grade yourself when you would come up to the front. He would always say, like, okay, so what do you give yourself? And you could say A every single time, and he would just write 9 out of 10 every single time and never question you on what it is that you were saying. And for the most part, I did say A every single time. I'm like, A. I knew that there was students that were a lot more talented than me. Like there was some crazy ceramics going on that I was like, whoa, you've been doing this for for a while. And they would a lot of the times be harder on themselves too. They would say like, "Oh, I gave myself a B because this could have been this way and then this could have been that way." I think that it has to do a lot with the teachers that I've had because I can remember being really, really young in in elementary school and messing up at like one of my ceramics painting classes. We used to go to this like color me mine kind of space, and me being kind of sad about it, and my teacher just being like, "Oh, it's a happy mistake. Like just make it everywhere and now you got confetti," or something silly like that. And she saved my plate and now it was like just confetti on the plate. And so I never like for my art ever had a bad association with grades. Now, in school, I was somebody who took my grades really seriously. Being the oldest daughter in an immigrant household, grades were like of most importance, and almost one of the only things that mattered was if I had good grades, then everything else was probably going good, right? According to my mom. And so um I there was a lot of pressure in having grades and keeping good grades, and I think sometimes that comes in and messes with my art a little bit in the sense that like I get a little bit perfectionist, or I get a little bit afraid, or I get a little bit judgmental of my own capabilities and what it is that I can do. And one of the other things that I think about is when I first started painting, or when I first started wanting to get back into art, one of the first things that I did was try to do a portrait of somebody. And I don't know if you've tried to do a portrait of somebody with no art skills, but it's just not going to happen. And I remember just giving up and closing the notebook and being like, okay, I can't do this. And then when I think about in retrospect how much work I had to put in to actually accomplish the art that I wanted to accomplish, and that I had visualized and that I wanted to share, I'm like, wow, all of that time is really what matters, right? That all of the devotion and all of the investment that you do time wise, no matter whether you create bad art or good art, it's kind of what gets you there. And even when you study art, one of the big breaking points for me was finding art that looked playful and looked more similar to the art that I create, because that allowed me to see my own art in like a big scale. Like Henry Rousseau's paintings were really playful and maybe didn't have the best dimension to them, but for me they made me feel like, wow, this is great art. I'm going to be a great artist too, because like I like this, it's fun, and it reminds me of mine a little bit. So I think that not necessarily thinking too much about like the grading of it all, but just creating and sharing, because you never know what's going to connect with other people. I mean, I've been creating since 2018, and the painting that the most people connect to is from 2019. Even if I continue making art and I connect to the newer paintings more people still come up to me about this 2019 piece than any other piece. So you just have to keep creating and just keep making things. There's this like little study that I think about often where it's like an art class. I think it's like a ceramics class, and the teacher tells she splits up the class into two groups. Half of the students have to create one perfect ceramic pumpkin, and the other half of the students have to create 50 ceramic pumpkins. They don't have to be perfect, they just have to make 50 of them. And the students spend their whole semester making one pumpkin and then making 50 pumpkins. And of course, the perfect pumpkin comes from the batch of 50, because all of the practice and all of the work and all of the people together doing things over and over and over again create a better pumpkin than just trying to make something perfect on the first go around. And I always try to remind myself that when I'm working, I'm like, hey, maybe you do mess this painting up. Who cares? There'll be more.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just about continuing to create and setting aside the time to do it. I think that's what often just takes us away from what we want to do. It's like, no, I need to do this. I need to wash the dishes. I need to clean the house. I need to fix my bed. I need to clean the bathroom. Like all the
Yeah,
things.
this goes on.
Um, the list goes on. And Clarissa, what is the rest of her name? I can't remember her full name, but Clarissa, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, talks about how there will never be
Sorry.
oh, hello. It's like he heard me say Women Who Run with the Wolves, and he's like, no, me. But she talks about how there will never be enough housework that we've done, and housework will always take us away from our art. And how committed can we be to our art that we can be like, hey, no, this is my own space. So at the end of the day, I really feel like that discipline and that commitment to our own art really makes a difference, no matter the grades, no matter what anyone else says, no matter how many likes, even no matter how many like pieces sell. The
Yeah.
consistency is really what changes the game.
Yeah, and I every single painting that I have has like a little story of mine where they take me 1 month or 2 months to complete. And so anytime that I look at a painting, I can almost see exactly what I was going through. So they're almost like a journal too, like a visual journal of my life. So it's a more of an incentive to keep creating because I'm just like, oh, what's gonna happen next? And like, what am I gonna come up with next? And it's fun. It's fun in that sense.
Yeah, it sounds like photos of your life, but rather than photos, it's literally created from
Yeah.
you. It's like this legacy that you get. Something I've been thinking about a lot is the legacy that we leave in the world when we leave. And so it's like this legacy that you get to leave in the world that people get to appreciate forever and ever, and that's precious to have. Okay,
Yeah.
so last questions for you are, where can people find you? How can they work with you if they want to work with you? And also, what makes you a artist? And if you'd like, please show us your favorite piece from your studio.
Okay. Let's see. So people can find me on my website. It's arteporlola.com, ARTEPORLOLA.com. And I have my full portfolio there so you can see all of the pieces that I've ever done. You can support through there, you can collect the print from there as well. So that's the best place to overall find me in the Bay Area, and I currently host acrylic paint workshops. So if people want to paint, then they can also find tickets to my classes on my website or through Eventbrite. And if people need to reach out to me for anything, on my website is all my contact information. And yep, they can find me that way. I'm also on Instagram, and I'm pretty good at responding on Instagram, more so than the other social medias. Arte for Lola on Instagram too, and that's where I share most of my art as it comes out. That's the timeline's pretty chronological there. And then for me, what makes me a artist is that I pour basically my whole emotions into these paintings. My whole heart goes into them all of the time when I'm working on them. Some of these paintings are about hardships that I've been through, and a lot of the paintings I think show me beauty even in the situations that might have been not so beautiful and a little bit more difficult for me. So a lot of the times they heal like parts of my heart I think that maybe felt broken to my mind, but once the creation is out there, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm understanding this a little bit more. And I think I'm also a artist when it comes to my food. Being a Taurus rising, we love good food and we love to enjoy like a delicious meal and just like sit around, and getting to do something where I can also invite people to do the things that I love to do, I think also makes me a artist. So I think those are my two favorite things about getting to share what I do. And then from my studio, I have like a bunch of pieces, but I'm like, let me see. What I'll share. I guess I will share this one. Let me see. I'm gonna have to stand up. Oh, sorry.
That is fine.
I think I'm gonna share this one right here.
Mm.
And it's called Looking for a Place to Heal. And she's basically like just sitting. It's a hot spring, the hot spring I visited with my family. So a lot of these are places that I go to and take photographs of. And so the hot springs I visited with my family, and I always ask water to cleanse me. So when I'm there physically, I'm kind of like performing a cleansing ritual where I'm asking the water to like heal me of anything that needs to be healed. And then for this painting specifically, I wanted to incorporate giving to my ancestors too, which is where this teapot comes in. It's a string of hearts to remind you to give love as well. And so, yeah, it's one of my favorites. And it's very blue. I painted it when I was going through a little bit of a breakup with some friends. And I think that that's why it's called Looking for a Place to Heal. Um, but yeah, it's always right in front of me and I love it so much. It's one of the ones that I like don't have listed on my website because I'm not ready to part ways.
Yeah, you like having it there right in front of
Yeah,
you.
I like having it. I like having it. Like, once I
Amazing.
get sick of it, then I'll sell it.
Amazing. Thank you for showing that to us and also telling us the thoughts that went behind creating it and the inspiration and the ideas. And it's just such an honor to be able to have this conversation with you after seeing all of your art. So thank you for saying yes and thank you for coming on.
Yes, thank you for contacting me. It was really fun and all your questions were great. It was really awesome to talk to you and to connect too.